Gosh, you're all exceptionally well behaved. At the first sight of proceedings, everyone's paying attention. That's great. Thank you all. Thank you all for coming. It's great to be here. My name is Chris Cesarian. I work for a fund in London called Manta Ray Ventures. I will be your host for this evening, so don't be too surprised if you see me coming on and off the stage all night. As a Tyrolean living in London, it gives me immense joy to see this many leading luminaries of the tech and venture and startup industry gathered here in Innsbruck, which is not typically known as being one of the world's global tech hubs. But it's very exciting that the movement behind the IECT and Startup Tyrol and all of that has clearly generated a critical mass of people here, and interesting things are clearly happening, which we'll hear all about later on. We're going to have a range of programming this evening. We'll be starting with a few welcome words from some of our hosts. Then we'll be holding a panel where we will speak about the sort of latest trend of artificial intelligence that seems to be the only thing anyone talks about in our industry at the moment, and whether or not Europe has a place to play in that key sector or not. Then there'll be an audience Q&A, so whilst everyone is talking, please do note down your questions so that you don't forget them. And then we'll be having a fireside chat with Andrea Taversone from the Nato Innovation Fund. And then, of course, the best part of the evening, some drinks and networking and a few snacks, I believe. So I will hop off the stage and invite Clemens Wasner on, who is the founder of AI Austria. AI Austria is a marvelous organization that I believe was launched during the IECT several years ago. It does all sorts of amazing things, which Clemens will tell you all about.
Yeah, good evening, everybody, and thanks, Chris, for giving me absolutely no pressure in what our organization is doing. I mean, just a little bit of a look back. We have a very deep connection with the IECT and Hermann, because it was at the first edition of State of AI in the year 2017 that we decided on the stage, literally, that we will launch a non-profit with the aim to co-foster the development of AI in Austria. So maybe, Chris, be careful. You might end up being the leader of a non-profit after the evening. You never know. So what are we doing? We basically have networking events all across Austria, also on a European level. We are very closely interlinked with like-minded organizations that want to improve the conditions for startup doing AI business in Europe. And as such, when it came to the pre-discussion with Victoria, who is not on the stage today, but which you know from the ICT program from the last couple of days, when we discussed what should we talk about this year. So we talked about overblown expectations and realities in the past. We talked about technological sovereignty. We talked about the regulation and so on. So this time we said, but what about actually the framework conditions which are necessary to, let's say, bring Europe up to speed? And therefore, let's say one conclusion, it was basically a foregone conclusion to invite Andreas Klinger, who will give the keynote today from European accelerationism, which is an exceptionally difficult word to pronounce, and to give us an overview that we are not just talking about the technology itself, because Europe is good in patents and so on, as everybody knows, but more like what needs to change that you have more entrepreneurship and so on. So without further ado, thanks for joining in such a big number, and also thanks for joining online, and enjoy the evening, and looking forward to the panel discussion later.
Thank you, Clemens. I will now invite onto the stage Markus Perschel, Head of Digitization at BTV, which is, as you may have noticed, this wonderful building that we're sat in. So thank you for hosting us, Markus.
Sure. Thanks. Dear ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of BTV Vierländerbank, I would like to extend a warm welcome to you. We are super happy to have you here, to have such an amazing crowd and such an amazing event here in Innsbruck, in our house. Yet we are not only good hosts here in Innsbruck, we are also at the forefront of the digitization and AI in the Austrian banking market. We have been awarded the most innovative bank in Austria last year. We are the digital newcomer of the year in Austria. So we are not only, again, a good host, but we're also super keen to learn more about you and to get your ideas. Against this backdrop, I wish everybody a great event today. We are super happy to get more ideas. There is a lot of stuff to be tackled, and wishing you a very nice event. Great to have you here.
Thank you, Markus. Well, we have one final introductory note from Werner Müller from the FFG. Thank you, Werner.
So thanks for the invitation. Werner Müller, Head of Startups from the Austrian Research Promotion Agency. So we offer public funding for innovation and R&D projects in Austria. So AI, I would say rather half of all applications for R&D projects of startups are in the field of AI today. So we heavily investing in the future in AI. So the State of AI is an important conference, I would say, for Austria. Also temperature check where we are in a way. Also happy as FFG supporting not just the State of AI, also the EICT summer school since years, as we see that there are so many, especially academic founders that think about could they go to the market with their ideas, not ending up in new white papers that may end up somewhere in a, wherever they end up, a Rundablage, I would say sometimes, and getting new projects with new funding. So we want them, these projects in the market. That's why we invest as FFG in projects for startups more with 100 million euros per year. So that's a rather important part of money in financing for R&D projects of startups, also in the field of AI. And so coming up to the State of AI, I'm really looking forward for the panel of today. Also happy that we have 7 teams, I think, from the FFG spin-off fellowship within the in the EICT summer school. So I think after this week, they are much more prepared for going into the market, being successful with their ideas and projects they've been developing in the academic field. And so we're really curious about the panel that is coming up, and wish you a rather good evening.
Thank you, Werner. All right, we're going to go straight into our keynote presentation now by Andreas Klinger. Andreas is a venture capitalist investing from a solo GP fund, which for those of you not too familiar with the jargon of our industry means he's running the fund by himself, called Prototype Capital, based in Berlin, but originally from Vienna, having worked all around the world, including Silicon Valley, and deploying capital globally. So a nice big overview of the world of AI and tech and startups. Please, Andreas.
Hey folks, thanks for having me. So AI is a cool topic, but instead of talking about AI, I thought we'd talk about bureaucracy, regulations, frustrating stuff. You know, it's a little bit more fun and engaging. What do you guys think? Yeah? Okay. So basically the idea of this is summarizing my personal thoughts on Europe and also its problems, and like a very simple how-to guide how we can all fix it within the next few months. Okay? So quick to get to know you folks. Like, who here is a founder or wants to start a startup? Okay, that's a lot of people. Who here is an investor? That's a surprising amount, actually. Okay, very cool. So we talk a little bit about Europe, a few plans and how-tos to improve it, and then afterwards we do a panel discussion. The whole thing is streamed on YouTube, so please be nice, no booing or shouting or anything, because it's afterwards on record. So about me, I was founder and CTO of a few companies. My CV is very long and very confusing. The short, interesting version is I was CTO and founding team of Product Hunt. Does anybody here know Product Hunt? Okay. For those who don't know it, it's basically a website where startups get launched. So like think of like the App Store and Reddit have like an ugly baby. It's basically that. It's extremely popular among startups because you launch startups on it, right? Outside of startups, nobody knows it usually. It's a very good test for this in my case. Afterwards, I was working at AngelList, which is basically LinkedIn for startups. Like it's a platform for like basically investors. I worked in the crypto division, and afterwards I was at CTO at OnDeck, which is back then was like a remote global accelerator. So basically earliest investors, kind of like YC, but without a default check. Nowadays I do like a small fund, or as I call it, glorified retirement. It's a deep tech fund focusing, it's a generalist fund focusing on first rounds and first check investments. I usually say it's like hard stuff, cool stuff, weird stuff, and very global. Over 100 investments on my website. You actually like it lists the startups and also like where I was like one of the first investors, because not enough investors, in my opinion, especially Europe, are comfortable being the first. A few examples: Remote.com, it's quite famous, I think. Luma Labs, which is very well known currently for Dream Machine, which is text to video. DustTT is a French AI startup, quite a famous one. And Fireside is a not yet famous space satellite company in India. So like I invest 25% of my money goes roughly to Silicon Valley, and the rest is like globally distributed. A lot of the stuff actually in Europe. So for example, Sensmore is essentially AI for construction vehicle. So think like a self-driving bugger, bugger? I don't know the English term. This one. Cool. So about Europe, who here has seen this meme? Okay. There's actually quite a few of those. Personally, I actually enjoy this one because I think he has actually a really good vibe. Like I could identify with him personally, but there's really a lot of those negative memes about Europe right now. Europe has like a perception of not being a good place for startups, not being a good place for business, not being a good place for innovation in general. And it just continues. I could have honestly done 20 slides like that. Some of the memes are actually true. This one I kind of agree with, to be very honest. But in reality, there is some truth behind it. So like the reason why I hate those memes is like, to some extent they're complete like bollocks, and to some extent they're actually true. Europe actually has a problem. In a nutshell, we are starting to fall behind. There is a whole very long article explaining how this chart looks very different if you apply a lot of like constraints to it, for example, purchasing power and a few other things. My personal POV is as soon as you have to add asterisks and footnotes to your charts to somehow compete, you're already like in the bad spot. It kind of comes down to that we didn't have many big winners in Web 1 and Web 2. Most of the companies we have, the large ones, are ridiculously old. And if you look into America, where all of the new companies are from, it's tech. So it's Web 1, Web 2, essentially what we would consider nowadays consumer tech. Like think of the Metas and the Googles and like all these big companies that come to mind. All of them are kind of like classic Web 1, Web 2 consumer tech. And the other problem we have is it's no longer us in America, it's actually us and the rest of the world. China is catching up a lot. And in my personal opinion, the one country to watch out for is actually not China, but India. India has an absurd GDP growth. I do a lot of deep tech investing in India. It's completely underestimated right now. And I think a lot of, especially Europeans, have like, I think Westerners in general have like an POV on India that's like roughly 99, 98, and like roughly stopped there. In a lot of areas among like GovTech, payment structures, and a few other things, they're like far ahead of us already. There's a few other topics we are currently making very bad press. I will not yet make a public statement on it. I first want to see the actual allegations and everything, but it doesn't look good. So what's up with Europe? This is like all the negative stuff, right? If you ask an American, it's usually that we don't have enough capitalism. That's like the number one answer I legit got when I was in the States. Like Europe is too socialist, there's not enough capitalism going on. If you look at the data, that's actually completely wrong. Like we are, our countries are actually highly competitive when it comes to any economic metric nowadays. We're not innovative enough. This is also like, if you just look at the data, it's wrong. So a lot of this stuff is actually just vibes. So for example, AI research, we are like among the top contributors. Tax competitive index, like a very common one, especially about Germany and Austria, is that our taxes are simply too high. If you want to pay low taxes in Europe, we have multiple countries where you can reduce your effective tax rate to far less than anything in the US. And even if you don't include this, we compete very well in this. Everyone is leaving to the States. We are actually net positive on tech talent from the US to Europe. So a lot of the stuff that we hear, like, it's not really in the data, but it's kind of still true. You know what I mean? So what's going on? The other one that I regularly hear is we lack ambition. We have like tons of successful deep tech companies. We have tons of other startups. Not as many as the US, obviously. We actually have so much ambition in Europe that we even export it to the US. The main thing I usually hear is it's a mindset issue. Like people are just like more risk averse. They don't like, failure is a big shame in our culture. They are not as entrepreneurial. They're having a too nice living or whatever. Like there's a lot of these mindset things you regularly hear. I also don't think that this is true. And even if it would be true, mindset is an outcome of a system. It's not the cause of a system. If you change the mindset, if you change the system, the mindset changes. If you show enough success cases to people, if you make success possible and easy, mindset quickly changes. A very good example here is India. When you talk to any Indian person, like founder, for example, usually it's the older brother had to go to the US or to the UK to be successful, and it was like a foregone conclusion. And the younger brother actually wants to stay now and like start a company there because it feels like a gold rush. Like whatever you just started will become a big company in India right now. And that beforehand, this whole idea of like, this is like a failed state, we have to leave, we have to go to the States, this was a foregone conclusion for everybody. This was a completely fixed mindset. Now it's almost the opposite. It's not like perfect, don't get me wrong, like there's a lot of issues, but the mindset itself is shifting. So what is our main issue? If it's like not like, there is some truth to all of this, there is some truth in the data, like you can always like find one chart that says one thing, find one chart that says the other one. What is actually our main issue? So starting companies is less common. Yeah, okay, why? Because there are fewer role models. Why? Because there's less funding. Yeah, okay, but why? Because startups are less likely to be successful. Okay, why? And now, like, if you just continue this, you usually come to two conclusions. Either because the consumer market is fragmented or the investor market is fragmented. Or differently put, it's just really, really hard in Europe to get early momentum quickly. It's really hard to convince your first investor. It's really hard to find your first customers. You usually like hit the limits of your own countries very, very quickly. When I did my first startup in Europe, we were in every newspaper in Austria. Nobody outside of Austria read those. Then we were in a lot of newspapers in Germany. Nobody out of Germany and Austria read those. And this is like a thing you just keep repeating. You almost have to like fight for each country individually. This is a huge issue, obviously, in consumer tech. The advantage we have, for example, in deep tech, is that customers are very comfortable buying from some random niche vendor as long as they're the number one worldwide. So like deep tech has a different opportunity right now. And Europe is traditionally very, very strong in deep tech research. But we still lack the investors. So why is it less common in Europe to get venture funding? What's your guesses? Huh? Risk aversity, maybe, yeah. I also think it's a very, very simple problem. Fragmentation. It's similar to consumer tech. In reality, every country has their own legal system, has their own tax system, has their own everything, which is a problem by itself. But as an investor, there should be 2 slides. Okay, I will explain you what this slide below is. Okay, so like use your imagination from now on. Okay, on the right side, you're seeing a chart that basically shows the sources of first investments in Europe. So like think a company starts, where did they get their first investment from? The predominant factor is domestic. Like almost in all cases, it's a local angel in Europe. Okay. A very a small amount, like I think like 10%, 12% is pan-European, and a slightly smaller, surprisingly not that much smaller amount is actually American. So like in a weird like parallel universe we're currently living, it's actually only twice as hard to get an American than somebody from another European country, even if that's a neighbor country. So like the European venture capital is like completely in silos, and it's very, very much understandable because what we saw here, like all these different legal frameworks, all these kind of like little changes and so on, they create uncertainty. If I get approached by a founder in Slovenia, I don't know what's the ideal legal entity there. If it's a first-time founder, maybe she doesn't know neither. I don't know a lawyer there. They might not know anybody, right? I have to like do everything from ground up, and then I afterwards find out, for example, in Lithuania, they don't have preferred shares, which automatically means a no-go for me. In Italy, Spain, there's like random special tax rules, which all of a sudden could, in theory, mean that the investors in my fund would have to do tax filing in Italy. Like all these kind of like rumors I hear from like random lawyers or random investors, half of them might be wrong. But that enough is for me like a concern that I'm not touching this. I'm not investing in an Italian entity or Slovenian or Lithuanian entity. You know what I mean? So what do we do now? The solution internationally is usually getting a Delaware Inc. So we feel like my Brazilian investments are actually Delaware Inc., like American entities. My Indian investments are actually American entities. A lot of European founders actually get American entities, which in practice also means, like, which I highly recommend, but it's also like very bad for Europe because a lot of the taxes therefore go to the States. So I as investor have an advantage, the founder has an advantage, can raise easier, but afterwards society has a disadvantage because all the taxes go to the States. Also, Europe in the last few years has been more and more aggressive towards holding companies that actually do this kind of like tax reorienting, which is especially a problem in Germany and Austria and a few other countries that are a little bit wealthier. And because of that, you see this option like less likely here. But we have no alternative. Let's play a quick quiz. It's just to like get a sense of a feeling what it is to be a pan-European investor, okay? Which of these are entities and which of these are medical diseases? We'll just do the left side, okay? Just to keep it quick. So, which of these do you know is a legal entity on the left side? SL, okay. Where's it from? Could be, I don't know. Other ones? Huh? AB, yes, okay. Might be. Which of these are definitely medical diseases, potentially sexual diseases? PID? Could be, yeah, I don't know. Let's see. Any other guesses? Sexual diseases, which ones? Last chance? Yeah, that sounds likely, yeah. Any last one? Okay, let's see. And as funny as this is the reality of like, theoretically, if I would be open to investing in other entities. And some of them have, like all of them have different legal code, different tax code, everything. Each of them has a gotcha. The US Delaware has gotchas like hundreds of them, but it's a standard, people got used to them. Because of that, I can go to like a random person, tell them like, leave their job in America, leave their job, go to Stripe Atlas, press 5 buttons, get a US Delaware Inc. Afterwards, come back with a YC safe. You don't even need lawyers because it's a standard document. I can sign and wire. In the Europe, it doesn't work like this. I will actually show afterwards how it looks in Europe. The outcome of this is, yes, we have the research, not so much the companies. So let's actually talk solutions. So like so far problems and like maybe counter arguments for charts, but like let's actually look at solutions. Because my strong opinion is one problem we have in Europe is we complain too much. I strongly believe you have to have like a deterministic outlook on life and just assume you can change it. Like your own life, the life around you, the world around you. And if it's wrong, at least you had a good time, okay? So let's rounding. A project I'm working on is a European standard entity. So to explain, in America, if I want to invest in a founder, get a Delaware Inc., create a safe, sign contracting document, In DocuSign, that's it. I literally get a link, I press a button, and AngelList automatically wires, okay? In Europe, I have to find a notary who's actually willing to pick up the phone, which is surprisingly hard in a few countries. I have to sacrifice somebody's firstborn. By the way, not all of them are true in every European country. Some of them are like different, okay? It's like different in every country. It has at least 25 documents. There's like in some countries, you have to actually slaughter a goat in front of a public official, okay? Because otherwise they won't do your paperwork fast enough so that you can actually send them the founder money before the company goes bankrupt, okay? There's like a lot of other steps. I made this a little bit shorter. And funny enough, in Germany, even in Germany, sometimes you wait up to 6 months because somebody messed something up. The difference of this is not that it's slower to start companies. It's not slower to get investment. The difference is it's less likely. In Europe, you actually have to have in America, a West Coast investor will invest in an East Coast company. The same distance, I think, doesn't even exist in Europe, okay? In Europe, to get to pan-European angels, you hopefully live in like one out of 4 or 5 countries who are tier 1. Otherwise, you're pretty much already screwed. Once you actually get that network established, you figure out that your local entity was the wrong one. Now you need to create a UK Limited or US Inc. or something else and hope that your tax authorities do not recognize that you're actually doing something illegal. And after you have done all of this and find people who are actually willing to invest, you might as well raise 1 to 3 million. This is why it's in Europe very, very common that like pre-seed rounds or like seed rounds you hear about are actually a little bit bigger. And it's very, very uncommon that somebody raises just like 500K or something like this. So the petition we are currently working on, we will introduce a petition to create a unified entity. It's confidence for founders, investors, standard documents, pan-European early stage investments. I told you it's way more exciting than AI, right? Like walking robots, text to video, nothing else is. Quite frankly, changing laws feels completely impossible. But I think honestly it's possible because right now we have a time window. Van der Leyen basically said that the next, I think it's 5 years in total, will be about investing in Europe. It will be about unified capital markets. It will be about removing problem for businesses. And one strong thing they want to push here is introducing something which is called the 28th regime. For those who don't know it, it's because it used to be called the 29th regime before the UK left. It's basically the idea that you have like an extra legal system outside of like the national ones, and then have like a pan-European solution for everything. So this is a project I'm working on. I honestly do not expect that I have like a few freaks who help me, but I don't think this is very exciting to 99% of the population, including me. What else is needed? So this is my how-to for fixing Europe. We need a standard entity, and additionally we need a few more things. Number one is we need to stop imitating Silicon Valley. Silicon Roundabout, Silicon Alley, Silicon Alps, like Silicon everything. There's no point. There's no point in trying to being the second best. San Francisco is amazing. I recommend every technical person in some time of their life be there. We have hubs that can easily compete in other areas. The whole area, like you guys know this very well, better than me, the whole area around Munich, Zurich, and let's include Innsbruck now, like this whole area is one of the AI, deep tech, and machine learning hubs. You can hire as good or better robotics team there than anywhere in the States. You can hire in computer vision. I invest a lot in computer vision. In computer vision, you can easily staff a better team there, easily. Anything around nerves, Gaussian splats, reconstruction, this is where this comes from. If anybody here knows stable diffusion, like this whole like text to images, comes from there, okay? The same is true with like AI in Paris or fintech in London. We have hubs. We shouldn't try to create like another Silicon Valley. We should just like try to brand those better. We should, and one thing I would love, if a lot of people here, like as a takeaway, what you could do, organize meetups. Because Europe won't be like by default, no matter what, it will be decentralized. We hopefully get away the fragmentation and the friction, but it will stay decentralized, just the way, because that's how Europe works. The academia is decentralized, everything is decentralized. So we need to organize more and more meetups where international people come to and get to know each other. So if you start, like my request number one is start organizing deep tech meetups for whatever you care, can be climate, robots, whatever you care about, and get somebody from a neighboring country to speak there. And if you don't have the money for it, maybe somebody in the room will pay for it. I don't know. Let's see. Number 2, we are really, really bad in branding. Who here knows Soho in New York? Okay, who here, when I say she's an Upper West Side girl, has like some sort of an idea what I mean? I have not been to Upper West Side my whole life, and I still have like a marketing association to a district I've never been to. I can barely name the districts in the city I live in. Americans are really, really good in branding. A good example for this, and this is like a lesson we can take, is El Segundo in LA. This is a district that was previously known for 2 things, warehouses and a lot of pollution. Now it's a startup hub. And it's not only a startup hub, it's a startup hub where I have these huge warehouses where they have like huge American flags, mullets, beer, drink, scream. And the interesting thing here is when you start a startup there, or like you move your startup there, you almost get like a whole identity with it. Like, you might not like this identity. I'm not 100% certain I do. But it's a very strong brand identity. It attracts people, it attracts like the investors and so on and so on. I strongly believe we need more branding and identity in Europe. Everything in Europe is currently set up in a way that we think in countries. Our local politicians want you to think in local countries. For example, here Austria, right? It's about Austrian politics and whatever. Whenever there's something good happening, it's local. If it's something that's bad, it's European Union, or like whoever is in the opposition, okay? We don't have a European entity. Like very few people say, I'm European born in Vienna, for example, which I used to say and then just freaked out people at some point. We also don't have an identity for being a European founder. That this thing doesn't exist. Like the hubs I was mentioning before, it's like Paris AI is a French thing. You know what I mean? Munich Deep Tech is a German thing. Whenever there's a success, it's a, huh? Bavarian. Sorry, Bavarian. A quick fun fact. GDPR is a mess because it's decentralized and fragmented, and each country can decide on their own, which means you have like 28 regulations, right? Germany has 2 because Bavaria insisted on their own. So in Germany you have 2 authorities deciding this, which also means nobody knows if you actually need those cookie banners, because technically you don't. So we all have these cookie banners because they just couldn't agree on putting it in one place. I'm not blaming Bavaria, I'm just... Anyway, we need an identity. Branding and identity is like one of those things which we as European always cringe. Like we're not good in this. In Europe, especially in Germanic countries, you're successful if other people say you're successful. You don't go on stage and say, I'm the shit. You don't do this. You know what I mean? And also like you're not comfortable like thinking in simple identities that other people adopt you. The other thing I strongly believe in is we don't need to be a more American. We don't need, like, we have a very, very good way of living. We have stable societies, we have great academia, we make sure that if your kid is born in a poor family, it still can become a PhD. You know what I mean? Our society in principle works. We need to be more European, more pan-European and not more American. So TLDR, the how-to, and if you do everything right, we have it fixed in 3 months. If not, it's maybe 5 years, but afterwards we are Gucci. It's pan-European standards, pan-European networks, pan-European founder identity, and local cross-regional hubs. And each of them is something where literally everybody in this room can pick something and do it. Cool, next steps. I'm doing a petition, working with a lot of people who are way better in this than I am. If you have experience in European law, corporate law especially, if you enjoy lobbying in Brussels, let me know afterwards. No pressure, don't raise your hand right now, but like afterwards. I don't think, yeah. Other things I would love to get help with is like, let's organize more and more meetups. COVID kind of killed a lot of the big meetup brands in Europe. Let's bring those back. Let's do more programs, especially around academia, like this one here, for example. Like create more branding. Like create hacker houses, create YouTube channels. Like be comfortable bragging about how awesome your local area is. and brand this hub. Yeah, and also like, if you're not into any of this, like build sci-fi startups, like build the future basically. Cool, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Andreas. That was a great introduction to our topic of taking that macro tech in Europe viewpoint and now narrowing it down onto what all of that means for AI specifically. So I'm going to invite everyone on this panel on stage, please. So, we know who Andreas is now. Thank you, Andreas. Introductions-wise, we've got Margarete Schrambuck, who's member of the board at Aramco Digital in Saudi Arabia. Previously active in politics in Austria, was previously Minister for Digital Affairs. Then we've got Nancy Nimesh, who's joined us from Berlin, who's representing Nimesh Ventures, her eponymous venture fund, and also has experience at, I think, all of the biggest tech companies based on the west coast of America that we don't need to go and name. Then Herman Hauser, thank you for organizing through ICT, part of the, well, the previous discussion, I guess, around strategic technology used to be around semiconductors. Now it's around AI. So I've been having this kind of discussion for some while now, I guess, and Clemens, who we've introduced. Herman, I might actually start with you to draw on that expertise. Were we having this same discussion back in the day about semiconductors in Europe, the way that we're now also terrified that we cannot compete anymore and we risk stagnating because of the advent of AI and because of all the reasons that Andreas outlined, you know, we don't have the structure that enables us to compete?
Well, first of all, I'd like to congratulate Andreas on a fantastic opening speech, which I almost completely agree with. Especially the point that you made about the 28th regime. Yeah. I had this lobbying effort that has been going on for many years in Brussels to give us a European Delaware corporation, and I mentioned this to Jona, who was on the EIC board with me, and she took it at heart. And just when the announcement came out that Ursula von der Leyen is behind this, she sent me an email and said, look, we haven't forgotten about you. We really think we have a chance of having a European Delaware corporation legal system, which I think is very encouraging. But to answer your question about the semiconductor industry many years ago, what few people know is that we actually had some of the leading very early leading semiconductor companies in Europe. Plessey, for example, had one of the leading leading CMOS processors in the world, and Ferranti, another UK company, invented FPGAs. They were called ULAs. And I actually was on a government committee in the UK, this was many years ago during the Thatcher era, when Britain, together with Europe, basically gave up on semiconductors because the news came in that Korea is going to put 500 million into their semiconductor industry. I mean, it seems laughable at the moment, you know, for how small the amount is, because a new semiconductor fab is 5 to 10 billion nowadays. So we had maybe quite a good position in semiconductors, which we gave up and then had to get back into the semiconductor business with, you know, 3 great companies that we now have, Infineon, NXP, and the third one, ST. But the analogy that I would like to talk to you about is the analogy between the excitement that we had about microprocessors at the time when we started ARM and the excitement that people have about AI now. It's basically the same type of people, the young people who really felt that microprocessors might change our lives, which indeed they had, and this was in the air, and they really felt that they were part of history, which was true. And now you get the same crowd, the same young people with this excitement about about AI, which I think will change and is changing our lives. So, and as you said, Europe actually has more AI programmers than the US. So we're actually not in a bad position to take advantage of that. Maybe the last point that I want to make is we lost search to Google, we lost social networking to Facebook. But the nice thing about technology is there is always a new game. We haven't lost AI yet. In fact, Mistral and Alpha, two perfectly respectable companies that have a chance of a global footprint. And in quantum computing, for example, we have some of the key companies in the world, and Innsbruck, of all places, actually is a quantum computing hub. So things aren't actually as bad as many people think.
Before we go any further, let's do a little bit of audience interaction. Given the title here is Europe going to stagnate or accelerate with regard to AI? We're just going to do a vote, binary. So if you think Europe is destined to stagnate and not go anywhere with AI, put your hand up. Okay, and then accelerate. So there's optimism in the room. Let's see. We'll do it again at the end and see if that changes. Exactly. Nancy, what do you think? You've worked at many of those big companies. You've invested in European startups. Does Europe have what it takes to compete in this global industry at a global scale?
Definitely. Yes, Europe, we have everything we need. We have ideas, first of all. Mm-hmm. We have lots of ideas. We have the creativity that's given through our historical development. What we need, though, beyond ideas, is really bringing them to life. And this is where we have to accelerate. I think economic growth will bring acceleration in everything. And so when you think about the past thousands and thousands of years, human intelligence has brought to life lots of ideas in moments that were of unprecedented and unpredictable ways. And that intelligence has been stored in our unconscious. And this is basically where Europe brings to stage great ideas that we can take back from history into the future. And I'll give you a few examples. Henri Poincaré, one of the last greatest mathematicians, polymath, and the father of one of the pioneers of what we call machine learning today, was talking about the intuition in mathematics. And that is where Europe can accelerate, bringing back those ideas to life, bringing back that idea of responsibility, but also we need a renaissance like we had hundreds of years ago. We need that renaissance of creativity that comes from Europe. And I also think the United States will continue to bring high-tech innovation. Why not play on each other's strengths? The US will continue probably to bring high-tech innovation. Europe will continue to bring creativity, which is very much needed and anchored in our genes. And China will continue to produce at lower cost. Also India, as you said, is coming into that area. So by all means, Europe is absolutely here with the talent, as you said, Andreas, before. We have the talent, we have the skills, we have the research, we even have money. We have such great initiatives as what we see here that ICT, Hermann Hauser is doing, and hopefully will continue to do. Not only in Austria, but pan-European in many, many markets. And so it really comes down now to playing on the strengths we have in Europe. And to your point also, Andreas, it is very important to go beyond the defragmentation and create and continue to have the mindset of growth. And that's the only thing that will bring stability and not stagnation. It's really growing into the next generations. And Hermann is pointing out the importance of the young generation and the importance of continuing to bring ideas. But we also have to make money out of this because there is no growth without making money. So that's probably the next big question that Europe has to answer, how we make money beyond the regulation.
Mm-hmm. Going back to Andreas's meme, US, China, Europe, it feels like we often frame these debates in terms of those three geopolitical buckets. I remember Herman 2 years ago, we were speaking at this event, speaking actually about semiconductors and very much in a kind of US, Europe, China framework. I noticed that one of the tables you had there, Andreas, with all the countries on there, there are a lot more countries on that list outside of those three. So Margareta, you've got experience working in Saudi Arabia now. I saw India was top of the list. Are we being a little bit inward-looking when we sort of fixate on these three big geographies? What's happening outside and of those?
So I'm happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation. It's a good opportunity to be home again, because I'm from Tyrol, as you are from you are both from St. Johann, we found out. So I agree with you, what you have said, Andreas, about India, and I feel the same in Saudi Arabia now, because it's a very young country. So there's a lot of opportunities in all these regions. It is in Europe, but it's of course in interesting markets which are not too far away. And I think building bridges there and corridors, we from Aramco, we have built an AI corridor, for example, to the US and also to Switzerland. Yeah, I have talked about this idea when I was down in Saudi Arabia as a minister at that time, and they have really implemented it. Unfortunately, not with Austria then, but with the US and with Switzerland. So looking outside and looking at markets which are not too far away, which are fast growing, this can also help startups, European startups, to do some bold moves. Yeah? Why not having your main focus in Europe and in India? Why not having it in Austria and in Saudi Arabia? These markets, they have like something very special. This is the youth. Yeah? 75% of Saudi Arabia are less than 35 years old. So 75%. So the young population is now building startups. The majority of startups built is by female. Yeah? So a startup domain is a female domain in Saudi Arabia, which nobody would expect. Yeah? So no covering necessary anymore. And there is also female startup entrepreneurs which are covered, but which are really good entrepreneurs. Yeah? So this is an exciting, I think one way of growing quickly is doing strange moves, unexpected moves into markets which are close, 5 hours flight from Salzburg each week, 3 flights from Salzburg in the summertime. So it's not difficult to reach. So the good thing about these markets, and we were not talking about Africa also. I know this is always forgotten and we think it's just for migration and things like that. But now being in Saudi Arabia, we look at a lot of markets in Africa which are young, growing fastly, and offer a lot of opportunities. And they are waiting for a technology transfer to share, to offer the huge market and the big demand. So there is a lot to do. In Aramco, we founded just recently an Aramco Meta Brain, which is a first solution where we put 90 years of experience of Aramco into the Meta Brain. So it's the first, definitely in the GCC, I would say the first very big company doing this extensively for all their data. And there is a lot. There is hubs, there is the corridors, there is a lot of things which can be used from both sides.
And I guess there's political will to make things as easy. And I guess there's political will to make things as easy as possible.
Yeah, there is Vision 2030. I can talk now about what is a little bit different to here. Of course, the systems are different, so they're moving very quickly. As there were 5 years ago, it was not allowed to go to Saudi as a tourist. This was not allowed, not for women, not for men, also not for men to go there as a tourist. Now they're investing 40 billion into AI. So I've just launched a fund on this and to invest all around the world, and also to build this bridge and bring talented people in, but also bring their talented people outside. What we can see is a little bit difficulty in execution sometimes, and this is where Europe can play a major role. And also young people from here can play a major role, because they are more like in the practical side, they have been founding companies, several companies, and they can show the young generations there. So the will is there, the vision is there, and the execution is right now in operation and growing fast. And it's very easy to access. It's 5 hours flight only.
Well, given that von der Leyen quote, hopefully the will is here now as well. So let's see if we can get the political momentum behind this. Clemens, as well as your AI Austria work, you're actually, let's say, a practitioner. You've founded an AI startup. And when I look back at Andreas's stop sign map of Europe, I just want to ask you, is it really as bad as it looks to get things done and raise investment and get customers across all the different languages, legal entities, frameworks, tax, etc., etc.?
It depends where your bar sits. I mean, I must say, before I moved back to Europe, I spent 7 years in Japan and 3 years in China. And when it comes to bureaucracy, Japan is like black belt, 10th level black belt. I mean, just for an explanation, I was a foreigner there that was leading and building up the entity that was still owned by an Austrian company. It was a consulting company. Many forms simply did not exist. So I would go to the local office. They take out a big codex with laws. They look and say, yeah, here you need to write the sentence from codex or from paragraph 971, then from the other book from C3, and then from D62. They write this on a sheet of paper. They give it to me. Then I go home, write this in a format, let it be checked by a lawyer, and then it gets stamped in the local office. So, for example, change of local representative or double taxation with Austria when you conduct with a Japanese entity stuff in China. I mean, this is now a very rich explanation, but this really happened. You don't have this in Europe. So, I mean, I know that's a very Austrian attitude. It's not that bad because somewhere else it's worse. Now, when it comes to the forming a company, yeah, I mean, I think situation improved a little bit, at least in Austria, with the flex code. This is like a flexible limited, so to speak, if you use English language. In terms of stock option, or let's say employee stock option program and founder vesting. Doing this in Austria in the beginning was immensely difficult. So you really had, I think in Vienna there were 2 lawyers back at the time that even knew how to conduct this. It's basically reverse vesting that you've implemented and so on and so on. But let's say at the end of the day, it's annoying. Yeah, but how to say, it's like a root canal treatment, but it's not like taking out the wisdom teeth. So it's bearable. But I think what is an advantage here is we are dealing a lot with the public sector. So we have one product that is dealing, for example, with the analytics of mobile mapping data for, let's say, where are road damages, where are streets traffic signs located, and so on. And the public sector here is much more willing to work with a startup. This is, for example, in many cases easier than working with US entities, because there you need even longer list of legal checks or hoops that you need to jump through. So the public sector as a first client is something that works pretty well here. On the investor side, yeah, maybe close with one statement. When I moved back, I literally knew nothing about Austria because I was gone for such a long time. This was actually one of my first meetings I had in Austria after moving back, was with Herman in Vienna. Back then, when we talked about this event for the very first time. And it was, it was unbelievable to see how few people in general knew about, let's say, what startups are even doing and so on. And I mean, what gives me a little bit of hope is how this mindset has shifted. It was, let's say, a couple of years ago, there was a little bit of the impression you have to be extremely special and so on to make a startup. I don't know, you need to have won the Fields Medal and so on, and only very few people can do this. I think nowadays it's more becoming a part of life, or let's say a valid career option, and this is actually already we talked about mindset. The situation has to change before the mindset changes. The situation has changed insofar as people no longer think you need to be Gandalf the Grey or White to make a startup, but it's just a valid option.
And to continue with that, I feel like there was a time where in order to start a company, if you hailed from most parts of Europe, you'd be expected to move to one of the top 3 hubs. Let's, for argument's sake, say London, Paris, or Berlin. Herman, maybe you're even an example of that, leaving Austria and doing that in the UK. if you were starting again, actually, I'll put it to you, Herman, do you think you'd be able to stay in Austria and build a deep tech startup that became successful, or would you still have the pull towards a bigger tech hub?
No, I think it is possible to build a big company in Austria, and we're trying to do this with quantum computing in Innsbruck. There are a number of quantum computer companies like AQT, Alpine Quantum Technologies, and Parity QC, which we have invested in. Parity QC is like ARM, it's the only quantum computer architecture company. So if you have an architecture company, of course, you want to be global by birth. And so all the deals that Parity now does is with quantum computer companies all over the world. So the ambition is there. The quality of the quantum computer groups in Innsbruck are world class. I mean, Zeilinger just got his Nobel Prize for the work that he did at Innsbruck, so it doesn't get much better than that. So we've got the academic credentials, we've got the ideas, and I think building a global company out of Austria is now a sensible ambition to have. So let's hope that we'll create a few.
Andreas, let's wave a magic wand and implement all your suggestions. So standard legal entity, taxes all sorted out, all that kind of thing. There are some perhaps structural facts that we're not going to get over, like the language fragmentation in Europe that's prohibitive for consumer segments. But if we hone in on AI, and if all of those structural things were resolved, how bullish would you be on Europe's ability to be globally leading in the development of AI?
I think most of our problems are homemade. So for example, like the Flexco mentioned, it is great. I would never touch it as an investor. Because if I bring a Flexco to a typical tier 1 fund, they will be like, what is this? And they will ask to reform as a UK limited or US delivering, because they won't touch it, because the bigger investors after them won't touch it. So the only way that this would be a place where this would stay would be if there's already enough momentum locally that it's like a foregone conclusion that the company just stays this way, because at that point it's just too much of an effort to change. The problem in Europe is, from my point of view, that not that it's hard to create a GmbH in Austria. It's annoying, but it's not like I have GmbHs. The problem is that each country has their own little thing. That's the problem. Like, if there would be in Europe one, that would be the worst thing ever. You literally would have to slaughter a goat, to get your entity. But that would be across all of Europe. There would be some startup doing goat as a service, and you press a button and the goat is gone. Okay? Like, you could standardize if it's like there would be software and standardization no matter how complex it is, if it's like only one. So a lot of the stuff is homemade, and a lot of the stuff is also in our mind. So like I completely agree with Herman here. You have a hub if you have 4 successful companies and some good academia to get new talent, and enough of a brand that people want to move there to join one of those companies. Once you have that, you have a hub. And if you look at like all the big examples that come up, they usually were like roughly in that area. Like Cambridge is a good example, but there's like usually like 4 good companies that like come from that area, and at that point it's like starting really, really well. And that's absolutely achievable. We're just not used to thinking that way in Europe. We think it's like this impossible task and we have to be whatever. No, we don't.
If I can just reinforce what you've just said, Andy Richards, one of my colleagues in Cambridge, made a very interesting quote about Cambridge about 15 years ago. The reason why Cambridge really started to come into its own 15 years ago is because he said Cambridge has become a low-risk environment to do high-risk things in. And exactly as you mentioned, what this meant is you can join a risky company where you know there is a chance that it will go bust. And when it goes bust, there are another few companies in the same field, say in quantum computers, where you don't have to move. You don't have to take your children out of school. You can stay in the same house, and you just change company. And that's very important for the attraction of an ecosystem.
So speaking of ecosystems, Nancy, you're in Berlin, one of, I think we can say one of the European sort of top-tier hubs for startup activity. What do you think it takes to build that ecosystem, that brand, that pull? I mean, Berlin is definitely one of those people that, I don't know, that's another one for Andreas, actually. You moved there, so that's another one to weigh in on. You know, how was that created and catalyzed?
I mean, I think it's really energy. It's passion. It's really burning for one idea. I saw a lot of passion in this room today, and it's really that spirit of willingness, of positive thinking. I have to say I've learned that in the United States. First and foremost, I've spent a lot of time there working for these global companies that you mentioned, and there is always this can-do attitude, right? And so to build an ecosystem, you need to inspire. You need to have a great idea. You have to have a vision, right? But then you also have to put people together, like you said, meetups. You have to really inspire creativity, new ideas. I did this really one by one. So I started to invite people to humanize and Miss AI. This was about 5-6 years ago. And I just went out there and invited Herman and invited probably a few people from this, Clemens and a few others, to just talk. We have to collaborate. Europe has a historical lack of collaboration between nations, and that's what we need to go beyond. And with this defragmentation, it's about really collaborating between states, but it also creating private-public partnerships where we can translate from sector to sector and into public policy. And that's the only way. Policy has to support development and not to just regulate. We have to have that policy that will support development, that will drive deployment. Speaking of AI, we have a lot of great AIs and startups here in Europe, but not enough use cases to convince customers to adopt. So it's really about adoption, and those ecosystems should drive adoption of technology and should drive real use cases. That's what every investor will ask you when you pitch your idea. How fast can my customers adopt it? And it has to start with an obsessive interest for the problem that we want to solve. Which problem? Amazon is having this famous leadership principle called customer obsession. If we start obsessively with solving a problem, in this case creating an ecosystem that can advance and bring the right mindset into life, then we can basically start asking the whys that you mentioned, 5, 7, 8 times. Ask why, go deeper, really try to peel the onion to make sure that you go to that root problem, and then solutions will emerge that will solve that problem. So.
Everyone's very optimistic here. So we've got an audience fully bought in. The panel has absorbed all the energy. Let's summarize. So we've got lots of talent. We've got wonderful places to live. People want to be here. The regulatory stuff is about to get sorted out, fingers crossed, touch wood, and whatever your superstitions are. And yet, not that much is happening in Europe. If we sort of dial down the optimism a bit, come back towards realism, there's got to be a few things actually missing from the puzzle. Margarita, you're nodding in agreement with me. What's missing to get to this acceleration point?
One of this is the speed of decision making, and I have experienced this myself. Everybody in big corporates, I've been before, I went into politics, I was in big corporates. There is a long process for decision making in Europe. And this is quite faster in other markets. So competing with these markets like China, the US, mainly also the US, and other markets like Saudi with 32 million people, yeah, it's like rather a huge market, single market. The decision making is really faster there. Yeah, so that is something we need to work on, and that is something but that's happening also in companies, not only in the public sector, but in big European companies. I've started my career in '95 in Alcatel, and I was 15 years CEO of different European IT companies. And I saw them all disappear. So this is the bad side of it. Yeah, we lost the game a little bit in this in digital transformation in the software, because there was like Siemens, there was Bosch, there were others. As long as we were in the hardware, there were a lot, and there was the Maschinenbauer, the German. There were a lot of big companies. It was breaking my heart that Alcatel just disappeared. Yeah, it was taken over by US. At that time, Lucent, before Alcatel tried to take over Lucent, and the US authorities were prohibiting it. I remember well the year, I think it was in the year 2000. Then 2 years later, Lucent came and took over Alcatel, and nobody said, "Hey, listen, this is an important topic, we have to secure it, we cannot just give it away." It was given away, it was torn apart, now it belongs to Chinese, so the brand belongs to China. And the rest has been now in Nokia. So we have managed this once, and we need to learn from that. That is not going to happen again. Yeah, so that we are losing skills to other markets like the US, or are being outperformed by other markets. So I think education is a big topic in Europe. A challenge is the number of young people. We have really high talent, but contrary to other markets where they have a young, very large young population, and demography is like this, we have it like this. We all know that. Yeah. So I believe in all the positive things which have been said, but there are these challenges, and we need to face them and compete with it. And how do you do this? I think best by working together. Yeah? So finding your own specialities, your niches. Europe will not be the one inventing AI or doing the initial, but we are the best in implementing because we are so good in execution. So that is a challenge. So we should not all see it's only good, but also accept the challenges and then cooperate with other markets to overcome them.
Would anyone like to comment on that? Yeah.
Yeah. In addition to that, absolutely, we need funding. To put a few numbers into perspective, US invests in AI about 330 billion for a population of 300 million people. China invests 91 billion for their population of 1.4 billion. European Union invests 45 billion only. So 300 billion, 330, 91, 45. That's the investment that we see today in AI alone. So we need funding, and we need funding not only from private, it will be great to have private money, but we also need funding from governments in the right areas. So for me, really it is, especially in the AI space, it will be about data, about talent, and about funding, these three things.
I'm hearing some nice whisperings from the audience, which suggests the questions are building up. So there's a hand that shot up very quickly at the back there. Bear with us whilst we get the mic to you. Please give a very one-line introduction to yourself, and then please ask a question.
My name is Dominic. I am trying to build an AI startup here in Innsbruck. I had the pleasure of attending this talk in Wattens last year. We talked a lot about LLMs, large language models, and how Europe only has Mistral, and we would need to invest more in that sense. But in the intervening year, those models have expanded by leaps and bounds. They're cheaper, they're faster, and it looks like a race to the bottom. At this point, do you think that Europe should be channeling its funding towards building better LLMs or to building applications of AI?
Can I answer? Yeah. The biggest problem is we don't have the data centers. Like, even if we would give a lot of money to AI companies here, there's a high chance that a lot of the compute would actually happen in the States. So I think it's like almost like an infrastructure problem in our case. The question, does it still make sense to invest in LLMs? I don't know. Like LLMs, I think LLMs is just the first time we're really, really comfortable throwing millions at like a version deployment, you know, which is insane if you think of it as a software engineer. But right now we're like in the early times of, for example, text to video or like image to video and this kind of stuff. Those models typically cost like 5 to 7 million on H100s. That's serious money, and they are still really, really early. Like if you have seen like these typical AI videos, they look almost like a little bit psychedelic. This is like super early. This is like GPT-1, GPT-2 text vibes, if you remember those times. So this is like still very, very early. And yes, text is a race to the bottom, but we are also now discovering the limits of LLMs. And now people are like working on the next phases, like we have, and so on. So like I don't think that heavy compute will go away, And I think we should extremely aggressively invest in data centers, because this is like, yeah, at least from my point of view, also like from the fact that we should have a sort of like resilience to this and like have our like almost like data center independence and data independence.
Data sovereignty, something we've been discussing throughout these sessions as well. Okay, anyone else in the audience?
Hi, everyone. I'm Fabian. We are an AI company. Recently raised our 5.5 million seed round in Munich and Berlin. I think it's a great discussion. I specifically fully want to support every single comment that was made in the introductory call. My question is more, it's actually a statement, but would love you to discuss it as well. I think it was mentioned a little bit in between the two of you. I think the problem is also that corporates don't really understand that the innovation needs to come from the outside, right? And I think I've been doing this for 15 years now, and now I would say we're quite successful, but it took me 15 years. Now I'm later stage 37. If I'm 24 right now, I can promise you if you go to the company, what you're gonna experience is nobody ever got fired for hiring IBM. Let's give it to the innovation guys with a budget of 25K. And I essentially will be told that I don't really know what I'm talking about, while I would actually say a 24-year-old right now has a much better chance of understanding what will be coming than even myself. So all I'm trying to say is I think that fueled with a really weird stance of the media that somehow just every single time SpaceX makes a leap forward, reusable rockets, labels it another failure by SpaceX, which I just don't understand, like at all, because it's an existential risk to just ignore the facts that there's so much forward, both on autopilots, rockets, and all of the other things. Is my question is almost like, because I see a lot of people here which probably have a massive amount of political influence, right? When are we actually gonna be real about the fact that we need to just change our perception of things and just say the things they are and just be open about it, and then understand that we can buy the innovation through M&A and we can give the founders that access, and then I think a lot of the things will come in place, because I am an European optimist. We started the GmbH very deliberately as a GmbH in Germany, because I think there's a lot of things that I think we can do here in Europe, and we have a different culture, which I actually think is a good thing. I fully support the fact that we should never copy Silicon Valley, but build our own. And so I would love to hear your opinion about it, because you all are in these circles, and I just don't understand why the corporates don't wake up to understand it's not gonna be one of the big four that are gonna have the answer to how do I operationalize AI. I mean, they all just realize this is existing, like all of us, by using ChatGPT. So $100 million on it and realize we're going to screw it up, because that's literally what the data says for the last 30 years, honestly. Yeah, sorry, very long question, but.
No, this is a great point. I just want to make it super simple. Start with the customer. Just be obsessive about the customer and then their need. Find out the need, and you'll find out if you have to build an LLM or a small LLM or whatever you build. But if you start understanding what a specific customer in your industry that you're passionate about and that you burn for, and then find out what big problems are there to solve, peel the onion, ask many times why, and then you will be able to find a problem to solve, and the solution will come from that steps. So in that respect, the young people in the room, we just encourage you to always start with the customer, not with the idea, but with the customer. The idea should follow after you understand the customer problem.
Can I add something to this? So I agree. So there is actual statistics around this. Europeans buy less from startups than Americans. It's just like a fact. And you can do this on SMB or enterprise. It's like the same. My main advice is usually let's say differently. I have multiple European companies also in AI, like for example, Dust in Paris. Their biggest clients are all in the States. And like realistically, at some point, you have a sales office there. Like there's no way around it. You know what I mean? At least currently. You know, one thing that's interesting is, so for example, Germany, because they used to be very famous for cars, has still a lot of like machinery, and like almost all of the deep tech factories, like SpaceX or Tesla or everything, in the States is actually with German machinery in the back end. And for example, the one company I mentioned before, like Sensmore, they're doing construction, like vehicles for construction, is also like very common in Germany and Holland and a few other areas. And they're selling to China because they're market leaders in their individual niches, or like at least one of the market leaders. They have now the problem that a lot of the Chinese start to expect more and more autonomous behavior from those vehicles. But in Europe, a typical machinist has never, like different universe, you know what I mean? Like no software education, no AI education, it's like a different universe. So those kind of startups start seeing more and more of this very traditional industries to actually reach out, because quite frankly, they have no other choice anymore, you know what I mean? So yeah, I agree with you on statistics, you're 100% spot on.
Any other questions? We'll do a rapid fire round then amongst the audience. Given that we operate in a world of limited resources and some of these debates seem to have very strong incumbent players where it's sort of played out, chips are designed in certain places, made in other places, LLMs in others, etc., etc. If you had to pick one specific area that Europe should focus on, where it has a competitive advantage within the AI space, where would it be? It doesn't have to be in any particular order, because I'm putting you all on the spot here. Or if anyone in the audience wants to express an opinion. Clemens, where would you focus?
Manufacturing and defense. And the reason why I say defense is most of the discussion we had today, we could have had 5 years ago. This means before decoupling was started under the Trump administration and accelerated under the Biden administration, before the Build Back Better program. So now you have a huge reindustrialization that is happening in the United States. So that the parameters have changed. And it will, from now going forward, it will be common that the large economic areas like China, the US, India, and so on, that you will just produce more stuff within your borders again. And defense will be definitely one of the things that you will do within your borders.
Makes sense, and we're going to talk about that afterwards with Andrea. Yes, Simon?
I am most excited long-term of the application of AI in medical applications. I had dinner with Demis Hassabis recently, who, as many of you know, is the guy heading up DeepMind for Google in London. His Alpha 2 program really was a revolution in medical sciences, because for the first time in history we could predict the shape of proteins just from the series of amino acids that make up the protein. And AlphaFold 3 has now extended that not just to proteins, but also to small molecules, and how these molecules, these medical molecules or biological molecules interact. So his new spin-out, isomorphism, is actually using these Alpha-3 ideas to apply it to understanding all the processes in the cell. And the reason why I think this is a real strength in Europe is we do have one of the great assets that we still have in Europe are our pharma companies, including Boehringer Ingelheim, for example, is very strong in Vienna. And the application of these new AI techniques to solve biology, to solve the way we improve our medical treatment of people, since it concerns our own health, I think long-term will be the single most important application of AI.
Nancy, where would you focus?
Fully agree with both those views, of course. I think robotics is a great area to push Europe to the next level. robotics and AI. We know that we have some great manufacturers of robotics that have been sold to other countries, like KUKA, to China, German company. Thankfully, it is still managed by Germans. So I think robotics is very important. And I want to add one thing which goes beyond this, which is we have to get hungry. We need to be hungry again. We have to bring out our lust to develop. And so I think that is the overarching topic in Europe, is get hungry again and bring your sensorial experiences out.
Very good. Margareta?
Yeah, I also think it's the R&D intensive areas like the biotech, as Herman said, because Europe is very special on this. It's so complex. It cannot be copied easily by other markets. I have seen things copied. I remember when I talked to John Chambers many years ago, I was able to talk to him for an hour when he was still the big CEO of Cisco and his strategic head. And young Margareta asked him, what is your biggest headache? And he at that time said Amazon. And I thought he would say Microsoft or somebody else, and nobody understood at this time when Amazon was still selling books, but they understood. They could not do anything against it, but and innovate from inside quickly enough. But Europe has all the people and the knowledge in all the R&D intensive areas, and healthcare and biotech is definitely one at the very top list. And also in Austria, we have the biotech hub. Yeah, there are great companies, like I'm working with one, it's called Ahead. They create organoids and brain organoids where you can test diseases, the brain diseases on the organoid instead of the human. So testing from human to human and not from mice to man, or from men to men and not from mice to men, and this will revolutionize. And there is big demand. You were always talking about the consumer, and there's big demand in Europe, in the home market. We are growing so old, and we are growing old fast. And in China, they are growing old. And also the Saudis will once grow older. Now they are very young, but it's only a question of time, because their birth rate has been coming down from 7 children to 3 children within 5 years. So with the change of women working and things like that, and the transformation of the country going on. So there will be a huge demand around in this area.
Yeah. I think AI as an industry will disappear. I think it's kind of like software in the end. Like we always call something AI until we are used to it, and then it's like image recognition, and then it's like GPT, and then it's like text to speech. That's not AI, that's just text to speech. That's just a recommendation engine, So AI is always the thing that we don't really yet understand. It just pushes and pushes. So for me, it's easier to think like what is in general deep tech areas where Europe is very, very strong. In principle, in most of them, like we have pretty much for everything, we have like very, very strong academia, like from climate to robotics to like machinery to manufacturing, you name it. Also bio and like in pharma is mentioned. The problem that we have is we do not translate from academia to companies. Based on like $100 million spent per university budget, we have like a minuscule amount of companies coming out of that. And I think this is like one of the issues we have here. Like, my talk is very optimistic. My personal POV is by default, Europe has like a downward slope, a very, very slow downward slope.
So you're veering towards the stagnation?
No, I believe that right now, by default, we will stagnate if we don't change. I believe though that we currently have a generation, we have also like politicians, and we have a lot of like second generation founders who are successful, who see the potential to change. And right now, I think we have like all the right parts, like talent and everything as mentioned, to change it. So, in principle, if you don't do anything, this will fail. But so does everything. And the only way out of this is like saying, let's change that. Let's get deterministic, let's get optimistic, let's have can-do attitude as mentioned before, and let's change that.
Let's see where the audience is with us. So, same question again. Let's see if anyone's changed their mind. European AI headed towards stagnation, hands up. The one, oh, we've got exponential growth here. We've three people now think we're not going anywhere.
It's recency bias.
It could be. And the acceleration camp, hands up. And I think we've got a new camp of not quite sure. If you want to express sort of in the middle, just the one. And you've documented it, so we've got it.
Everything, this is now.
He's collecting names afterwards.
Exactly. Thank you, everyone. That was great. Very interesting. Thank you, and thank you all for the questions and participation. All right. I'm now going to welcome onto the stage Andrea Taversone from the Nato Innovation Fund. Thank you once again to all of our panelists. I really enjoyed that. I've never experienced so much optimism and consensus on a panel, though. Well, maybe it's just the topic. So, Andrea, grab one of these handheld mics. Glad you could make it.
I did.
Nice to see you.
No traffic.
So maybe tell us a little bit about the NATO Innovation Fund, first of all, what it's doing, and then we'll speak a little bit more about how that relates to AI and deep tech.
Yes. So the NATO Innovation Fund was originally raised inside of NATO by the NATO Innovation Unit, and then it was spun out of NATO when the fund was eventually created at its first close. So we are actually an independent venture capital firm headquartered in Amsterdam with offices in London and Warsaw for the time being, totally independent of NATO. And we have 24 sovereign wealth funds as LPs. So the fund is a bit more than €1 billion. And the thesis of the fund is to invest in deep tech in the 24 countries that have funded our fund, deep tech applied to defense, security, and resilience. It's a slightly different fund because it's a 15-year fund instead of your normal 10. So it's actually 15 plus 3. So it's a patient capital fund. We can lead transactions and we invest in funds as well as in companies. So we're going to invest about 10-15% of the overall capital in our fund-of-fund program, which invests in the same sector, in the same type of technology, but pre-seed and seed. And then we are investing at mostly Series A, some seed, some Series B, and beyond. So that is the thesis of the fund.
And you've been doing this for a very long time, because before the NATO Innovation Fund, you worked alongside Herman at Amadeus. You've been doing deep tech probably since before we were calling it deep tech. Do you mind saying how long?
Yes, I was trained by Herman. Everything I know is because of Herman. So I am the best MBA student he ever had. I started in '97, you're right. There wasn't such a thing as tech and deep tech. It was all deep tech. So when I joined and I worked with Herman on a few deals, some of the first early deals we did were in semiconductors. So at Amadeus, we've continued to do deep tech all along. And so for me, the step to the NATO Innovation Fund was painless from a investment point of view in terms of sectors and network, because we're just doing the same, basically. With a bit more focus on defense, security, and resilience, but we cover anything from biosecurity and biotech all the way to materials. So very much aligned with what Amadeus originally did.
And so having been investing in Europe in deep tech for a long time, AI being the latest iteration of, we can call it the hype cycle, we can call it the concerns around strategic sovereignty, whichever angle we come at it from. How optimistic are you that Europe has a role to play in AI? And perhaps another level deeper, should it? Why do we have the big discussion of we need to be part of AI in the first place? Is that a relevant question to be asking?
It is. AI and machine learning is one of the 9 emerging disruptive technology areas that we focus on. I think there is a lot of focus on AI, but in my view, in the wrong sectors of AI. AI is big. It's a big sector, is an enabler, so it's hard to define it as a technology anymore. Fundamentally, you either have the data, You have to have a lot of compute power. You can try and build Gen AI models, which is very capital intensive. What I found in this sector over the past 5 years in particular is that if you sell direct to an enterprise, you're basically selling a service. And founders often start a business in AI thinking that they're a product business, but actually they're a service business. So they actually use venture capital money when they should be using customer money, because customer brings the need, brings the data, and they do a model. I was very impressed with the Silo AI founders. I don't know if you heard of Silo AI. It's a Finnish company that, if you haven't heard, is probably the biggest success in AI in Europe so far. It was bought this month, or last month in July, by AMD for $665 million. And it was basically a group of academics who got together and they did AI as a service for customer, charging them services. And interestingly, they grew significantly to the point that the majority of the business were bought by a private equity firm in 2022, Altor, who then flipped it 2 years later, making a phenomenal return, basically on a service business. So most of AI is with that business model. So asking your question, going back to your question, I think Europe has absolutely a key advantage, but in different parts of AI. So the places where we at the NIF are focusing on are at the sort of beginning of the chain, which is hardware, semiconductor, and actually materials, substrate for semiconductors, to totally change the speed and latency of AI, and then new architecture on the hardware side. And we also focus at the opposite end, because at the end of the day, if you peel it down to its basic, in AI you have data, math, compute power, which means power. And so we're actually focusing on nuclear fusion, where I think there is incredibly interesting technologies in Europe that will be the next phase of integration in AI, basically power source.
That links back to one of the themes from the panel, that actually we have all this fundamental technology, we're just struggling with commercializing it, and from what you just said, maybe that links into a little bit into funding it. Given you're operating across Europe, all the different countries, you've got a fund of funds model, different LPs. Do you see any particular innovation in funding models that is conducive to, pushing ahead with AI? You mentioned the fact that you're a slightly more patient fund. One of the big constraints that often comes up having this is, the 10-year venture capital cycle being a bit short for technology to mature and commercialize. The average 4 to 5 3-year government term being a bit too short to actually have that strategic vision to push things through. What are you seeing different, approaches across Europe to making this work?
No, I'm not seeing any new approaches. The only creative deals that we've all seen is the OpenAI Microsoft deal. Yeah. I haven't seen this. There is a lot of, in my mind, I don't think investors are paying attention at the risk of open source. I don't remember when it was. I think it was February 2023 when Meta released their Llama model. I think today Llama is still the basis of most GitHub AI projects. So you have the issue of open source and whether it is open weights or open models or open source all the way. So my fear, if I were an investor directly in a Gen AI model, even with a, let's say, creative funding method, is that I might be risk my capital against one of the hyperscaler open sourcing their model to attract the development community. So I don't think that there are many investors that are being creative yet, but I also am not sure whether it's the right place to put capital in for the reason I mentioned before.
And in terms of where you're allocating capital, you mentioned 9 strategic areas. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about what you're seeing that excites you the most.
Full homomorphic encryption is an area that it's exciting us.
Hands up if you know what that means. Otherwise, we might have to. Okay, if you tell us a little bit what that is.
So full homomorphic encryption is a different type of encryption with a specific architecture and protocol where basically you can have access to the data without touching it, and you can get the intelligence of the data without owning it or transferring it. So it's great for intelligence applications, for example. So that is a very key area. Underwater sensing technologies is another key area. From a security point of view, quantum computing is a big area of investment for us. Nuclear fusion and alternative generations of energy generation. Actually, believe it or not, grid resilience. We have an issue around Europe about the resilience of our grids that are becoming more and more obsolete, if you wish, because you have all these EV being plugged in and this renewable coming, but our grids were not built for renewable energies that have a different frequency, and you have a frequency synchronization issue. So grid resilience is another key area of investment that we're looking at the moment. Autonomy is another important area that we are looking to invest in, and new materials and semiconductors, as I was mentioning before.
And so now most of those technologies, I think, could be described as dual use, meaning both civilian and military applications. Given there's now war much closer to where we're all based than anyone would like, is that an accelerating factor?
It's interesting you asked this. I just come from Copenhagen this morning, where I was at an event organized by AFO. AFO is the Danish Sovereign Wealth Fund. Is probably one of the largest sovereign wealth fund investors in venture in Europe for sure, and globally. They're also thought leaders. They were the first investors really in ESG as a private equity investor. And today's conference was about defense. And in their mind, defense is becoming another letter in ESG. So I think that we're going to see a big wave of hopefully private and government capital coming into dual use.
And how do you define that? You know, a lot of the time the line can be a bit blurred. You know, you talk about materials, for example. It's very hard to say how that material will end up being used. For those that are perhaps more sensitive about dual-use technology, how do people define the limits as to how far that can go?
The best way is to exemplify it with a product or a company, because, as you rightly said, if you go too far back into the chain in real enabling technology, whether it's material, semiconductor, or components, really the companies don't know where these are being designed into. But take drones, which are really an end product. So you can have drones that are defense only, or you can have drones that are dual use, that have a commercial application as well as a defense application. So that's really the difference between dual use and defense only or commercial only.
And so, of course, the way you're, set up, spun out of Nato, you have this focus on dual use. Do you see a lot of private capital that doesn't have that legacy coming in and getting into the dual use framework as well?
The first thing I did when I joined the NIF was because I knew the impact of EIF in the venture world in Europe was to spend 6 months in working with EIF to see if I could help them change their policy toward dual use. And it was announced last month that they did, and they're now allowing their managers to invest in dual use. So that one is going to open up the market dramatically and attract a lot of private capital behind EIF managers who can now invest in dual use. But more importantly, what we are finding is that, interestingly, tech entrepreneurs are the first that are starting doing dual use and even defense-only type investments from the US and Europe. And I think that they will be followed very actively by VC firms.
So you think there is a bit of a shift in the market for what we now call deep tech?
I think there is, and I think that AFO stands, which has changed significantly, which will be announced publicly soon, I think is a key milestone for me.
And not to make the assumption, is that a good thing for the development of more technologies, AI native European applications and so on, or does it become a distraction and a lot of money gets funneled into quasi-defense like purposes without addressing more, broader needs?
I think it's additive. I think that dual-use company will always have a commercial addressable market, but now they have a defense addressable market. So it's about finding product market fit in a new market, in a new segment. So to me, it's just making the addressable market for this portfolio company or these startups much bigger. Now, it's a different channel to market. It's a different way to explore product market fit. It's a different procurement process, but the size of these markets are now significant enough to warrant investing time and capital to open them up.
And do we have the talent and the expertise to navigate those new markets?
Yes, we do, because there are some very strong primes and suppliers, particularly from the telecom world historically in Europe. Alcatel-Lucent was mentioned, there are one, Nokia is another one, that sold traditionally to defense. So there is actually a lot of expertise in Europe in technologies selling into defense. In Cambridge originally there was a lot of radar technologies developed out of consultants, technology consultant in Cambridge as an example. So the expertise is absolutely in Europe.
And I don't know if you saw the news today, but YC admitted its first defense-specific company today, or this week. Famously, a lot of the tech innovations over the last 10, 20 years have been funded through defense contracts. It's a big part of the Silicon Valley story. Now that dual use is, let's say, acceptable and encouraged and desired in Europe, how do you see that play out? If you could look into your crystal ball and make a prediction, the way it played out with Silicon Valley, and ultimately you get something like the iPhone, how do you see all of the current movement playing out in Europe?
The first thing we're going to start to see is a wave of defense tech early stage VC being set up and raising capital and starting their activities, deploy their fund. I think that's already happening. And we are participating in that wave and investing in some of those funds. I think those funds will invest in some disruptive technologies. So another key area we're looking at is laser and pico lasers. And there are all sorts of applications around, commercial applications, that will benefit from companies that are first developing for defense and then apply to commercial use. So I cannot think of an iPhone, but I can think of many applications around secure communications. So let me give you a real-life example. Most of the satellite communication, LEO satellite communication, are using RF technologies that are inherently, they have a big beam, if you wish, and they're not safe. So there are a couple of companies developing laser technologies that have much higher bandwidth and they're much narrower, therefore it's much safer. So you can have a very small transmitter on a satellite and on a receiver on the ground that is the size of that table rather than the size of half of this room. That will dramatically change satellite communication, but it will have applications here on Earth as well from a communication point of view.
Very cool. So to bring it back to the previous topic of conversation, on this spectrum of Europe stagnating with regard to AI or accelerating and becoming a global leader, where do you place yourself?
I want to place myself obviously in the accelerating piece, but I think that the trick is going to be to focus on the right areas and not compete against US company and US VCs. There is a famous AI model company that raised $200 million from a top VCs, and within 2 months of raising the capital, 3 of the 5 founders left because it was just another Me Too company. I think that should not happen, and I think that the investors should focus in an area where we have expertise, where Europe can differentiate, which is probably in the harder part of AI, so semiconductor materials, rather than just back the next AI model company just because it's fashionable.
So focus and don't get carried away with the hype.
Correct.
Being the path towards acceleration.
Yeah. It's in a weird way, it's a less risky strategy to be contrarian, in my view, in this field.
And if you had to pick a few key areas for Europe to focus on?
I would definitely focus on next generation semiconductor architectures. I would definitely focus on new materials where we have unique expertise. Those are the two areas where I would focus on.
And the consequences of not getting it right if we land towards the stagnation side of the debate?
Well, in a way, the thesis of my fund is to back companies that are developing strategic and unique technology that can be accessed both by government, i.e. my investors, as well as enterprises. So if we fail, I will have failed as well with my fund. So I will work my damn hardest not to fail. If we fail, it's a tricky position to be in because we cannot access the technology from the East anymore. A lot of these technologies have ITAR restriction or export restriction from the US. So it's going to be quite hard to access them as well. So I think it will put Europe and the UK in a very weak position. And I think so it is, it's our responsibility to prevent that from happening, basically.
And how bullish are you that we can put it off effectively?
If I just measure it by, one, the number of entrepreneurs who are aware of this and they're doing something about it.
Many of you are in the room.
Many of you are in the room. And two, a new wave of capital coming into the sector. Deep tech was never sexy. It only seems to be sexy now. I'm a bit too old to do something this sexy, but there's a lot of capital coming into deep tech, and I'm hoping that that will also change the needle.
I hope you're right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. You've been a wonderful audience. Thank you again to all of our guests. We're done for the evening. Hopefully see many of you just outside the door for a drink and we can continue the conversation. Thank you.